Next time, now it's a little time to start our first presentation of the morning. Today we have with us Bill Dedman, one of the lead reporters on Newsday's undercover investigation of racial steering by real estate agents. He designed the hidden camera project, The Long Island Divided, which showed us agents reinforcing racial segregation through illegal steering of homebuyers. The project launched investigations by state and federal authorities and several steps by the National Association to increase awareness of fair housing issues. Newsday's team received several national awards for their work, including a Peabody Award. Long Island Divided and its accompanying 40-minute documentary film, Testing the Divide, are available online at newsday.com/divided. Bill is a Pulitzer Prize winning investigative reporter and #1 best-selling author of the biography Empty Mansions. He received the 1989 Pulitzer Prize in investigative reporting for his work at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution on The Color of Money, his series on racial discrimination by home lenders of middle-class Black neighborhoods. The Color of Money led to expanded federal laws on disclosure of loan data, new financing for middle-income homebuyers, and greater awareness of systemic discrimination. He has spoken on fair housing and fair lending issues for the National Association of Realtors, the Federal Reserve, and many other financial institutions. Today, Bill is going to address for us how these tests of real estate agents were conducted, the major findings that came out of it, and what agents can do to ensure fair treatment of consumers, what training and resources are available, and what else we should know. Bill, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you. It's really good to be with everybody in Indiana. I'm excited to have this opportunity to share with you our Newsday team's work on fair housing. I know that all of you want to make sure that every customer who calls or emails or someday walks into your office is treated fairly. It may be surprising to you. It certainly was surprising to me when NAR and so many real estate associations have responded positively to a newspaper's investigation. It seems that our Newsday team's tests on fair housing have sparked an important conversation, but also action, with industry leaders saying that these are practices that must change, and soon. A couple of examples. When the head of Realogy, America's largest real estate company, which, as you know, owns Coldwell Banker and Century 21 and other brands, when that CEO says we should be testing our own agents and brokers for steering and unequal treatment of customers, then something has changed. When several realtor associations at the state level and some large city realtor associations have begun to organize programs to test their own members for unequal treatment, then change is happening quickly. And when NAR has embraced this idea of self-testing of agents and says, we'll help make that happen, then more change is coming. The thinking seems to be, if we don't get ahead of this, policing ourselves, we'll keep having these kinds of embarrassing investigations, damaging our brand. Besides, fair housing is the law, and it's the right thing to fix this. I'm hoping that together we can dive into looking at a few clips from our Newsday video of agents in action, admittedly, not on their best days. And we can talk about some of the most difficult questions, such as what agents can and should say about schools, and that we can discuss steps that agents and brokers can take. My goal for this session is for it to be helpful to you, but also challenging, giving you something to think about and to take action on.
So you won the Pulitzer Prize for an investigation into mortgage lending practices. And I thought it'd be really interesting for our viewers today to hear a brief summary of that investigation and how does that compare to this one that you're discussing with us today?
Yes, there are a couple of connections, Andy. The stories in the Atlanta newspapers were called The Color of Money. They were about redlining, the old practice of mortgage lenders doing business on one part of the map, but not another. And this was back in the late 1980s. And redlining had gotten attention earlier, but seemed to be thought of as something from the past. We found lenders in Atlanta and other cities making home loans in white areas, even lower income white areas, but not in Black areas, even the higher income Black areas in Atlanta that were home to Coretta Scott King and executives from Coca-Cola and Delta Airlines. A couple of points about this. First, the customer would have no way to know where the banks didn't make loans. The lenders in Atlanta said no one has ever complained, but we looked at how the banks operated. We found differences in where branches had been open and closed, differences in which real estate agents the banks marketed to, even differences in which branches would accept a loan application. And I'd like to mention some connections from a more recent project for the Boston Globe that looked at something you'd think would be entirely disconnected: traffic stops. The series is called Speed Trap. An interesting thing about being stopped by an officer for speeding is that we all deserve the ticket. We were all speeding. We're all pre-qualified for the ticket. And it's like being a bank customer or a real estate customer. You have no way to know if you're being treated equally. If you get a warning or you get a ticket, did everyone else going the same speed get the same? You would have no basis for a complaint. What we found was that in Massachusetts, when we looked at every traffic ticket and every warning in the state, who gets a ticket and who gets a warning is pretty easy to predict if you know the sex, age, and race of the driver. For example, women much more often got a warning, especially younger women. I talked to a college student. She had gotten 4 warnings in 3 weeks. That break for women runs out at about age 40. It's the same as who gets roles in Hollywood. Minorities much more often got the ticket, especially Black and Latino men. Again, the customers wouldn't know. Maybe even the officers wouldn't know how it breaks down. Taking together these 3 very different stories: redlining, traffic tickets, steering, and real estate. What are the lessons? First, the absence of complaint tells you nothing about whether your office is obeying the law. We all understand that it's not a fix to say, well, we respond forcefully to all complaints. No one would know to complain. Second, diversity efforts alone will not solve this problem. Diversity in hiring and promotion is useful in many ways, but it's not a cure-all. We found, for example, white and Black police officers treating minorities different from whites. We found real estate agents of all races and backgrounds steering customers. Third, small actions, small policies can have a huge impact in creating and perpetuating a segregated system. For example, it seemed clear that the realtors in our tests didn't have rigorous standards for what they do and don't do with every new customer, no checklist. We saw customers come back with thick folders of information, others with skinny folders from the same agent. That seems like something that you can fix. Do agents have consistent ways of qualifying customers? You ask credit scores and income from everyone or no one? Do you require pre-approval from every buyer or none? In between, where some people get a break and others don't get it, that's how you end up on YouTube. Now, I'd like to show you an introductory part of our documentary film from Long Island Divided. And in this clip, one customer receives service from an agent, while another customer in the same circumstance, seeing the same agent, is denied service. Let me play that clip for you. Just take a second. Here we go.
You were not going to like That's good. But you don't want to go there. It's a mixed neighborhood.
Mixed neighborhood.
If agents are courteous and professional, how can you know that they're treating you equally compared with someone of a different race or ethnicity?
I have to say it without saying it, you know.
Behind smiles and handshakes, how do you know if they're giving you fewer options or suggesting different areas?
I'm not going to send you anything in one direction unless you don't want to store your car to buy your friend.
Or that rules don't apply to you and another home buyer in the same way.
Yeah, okay, I definitely need that.
Long Island is one of America's most segregated suburbs. Newsday set out to discover what role real estate agents might play in keeping it that way, potentially affecting the quality of lives.
Technically, as a real estate agent, you shouldn't tell the buyers.
In house hunting, it's nearly impossible to see evidence of hidden discrimination. You would never know unless you go undercover.
In one test, Johnny Mae Alston was the black tester and Cindy Parry was the white tester. And they met with Anne-Marie Quealy-Bichon at Signature Premier Properties office in Cold Spring Harbor. They asked for the same thing. As often happens, the agent discussed getting pre-qualified or pre-approved for a mortgage by a bank, showing how much a buyer can spend on a house.
You pre-qualified, I guess. My husband's working with somebody in a bank. We've done some preliminary talks, you know, about getting pre-approved.
Neither had been pre-approved or pre-qualified. Here's what the agent told the black tester.
So I really need that. I won't take out any money unless you have a pre-qualification letter. So I need to.
So that means I can't
pre-qualify for a mortgage.
Oh, so that means I can't go out to see anything.
I won't do it. You can try another person, but I don't have the time.
And without pre-approval, here's what the agent told the white tester.
What is your availability? When can you start looking at houses? I would say not this coming week.
Cindy received 79 listings from this agent. Johnny Mae couldn't get any listings. And Cindy, the white tester, received 2 home tours. They had the same finances, the same budget, and they made the same request in the same area. But one was white, the other was black. The agent treated them differently.
So can you tell us, why did Newsday start this investigation in the beginning? What was the impetus to this?
Oh, yes, Andy. Let me set the scene. Long Island, some of you know, stretches east of New York City with almost 3 million people in a suburban area of New York. And you know, it's an area with a lot of diversity overall, people from all races and nationalities, but minority groups, especially Black home buyers and homeowners, are concentrated in very few communities. For example, out of more than 200 communities on Long Island, a majority of the Black residents live in only 8. Now, is that by choice? We long had heard from Black home buyers who had encountered problems when they tried to buy a home outside of those few areas. So Newsday decided to follow the methods used by fair housing agencies, sending out testers, with the addition of hidden cameras to record video and audio. That's legal in New York, and it's legal in most states. It's legal in Indiana. Most state laws say that recording is legal if one person in the conversation knows that it's being taped, and that one person can be the home buyer, the tester. The main reason we did testing is that it's the only way to see reliably what is happening and to make sure that the tests are done fairly. Our testers often came back from the real estate office telling us, that agent was so nice. They only learned the truth when our team brought the buyers together to watch videos and to see the maps of the listings that they had been given. Here's a video clip that lets you meet some of our testers, but also hear from a fair housing expert who works with them and see some of their reactions. I'm going to start that video for you. Just take a second. Here we go.
It almost makes me wish that the racism is more explicit so that I would know about it.
Too often I hear people who maybe aren't as familiar with this kind of work say, oh, well, they were just testers. But all you have to do is tell someone, which I have to do on a fairly regular basis, that you were turned down because of your race, and tell them the circumstances that occurred on a particular test. And you will see just how real and painful that injury is.
Elmont, you know, it's okay, it's good, you're very close to the city. Some of them are not as nice, you know, Elmont.
I do remember him, he was nice, and I do remember him pointing out on the map.
Oh, he loved that map. I remember that.
Yeah, he had the map, and he's like, you know.
Some of these towns, in my opinion, are not necessarily the greatest in terms of school districts, safety, you know, crime, resale.
You know, the agent with the map, he looked like General Patton planning the invasion of Sicily, but he had a different plan, a different invasion plan for homebuyers of different races. For the whites, it was don't get off the highway until you get past those neighborhoods. One of the patterns that startled us was when agents, time and again, began their presentations to the buyers. Remember, these were new customers with inappropriate comments or information that violates the fair housing laws. It seemed to be the sales pitch, the standard guidance for narrowing the home search. I hate to say it, but for those agents, it seemed that steering was part of the service that they were selling.
Bill, give us a little summary of the test. I mean, who was tested and what was the outcome? How did they pick those agents?
Yeah, so our Newsday team focused on home sales only. Testing is very often done in rentals. We looked just at sales, and we sent out first-time home buyers. So we'd send a white home buyer and then an Asian home buyer, or white and then black, or white and then Hispanic. And we'd mix up the order of who went first. And because they were first-time home buyers, the selling another property was not on the table. The home buyers gave the agent the same circumstances. They were first-timers. We chose testers of the same gender and the same age. We dressed them in the same business casual style. I went shopping at Nordstrom for similar purses for the women. They asked for the same geographic area, the same price range, the same number of bedrooms. And they were prepared to give the same income and credit scores, but rarely were asked for any financial information other than mortgage pre-approval status, on which they were the same. We shop for houses from entry level. Now, on Long Island, entry level is about $400,000, up to a higher end, $7 million. Now, $7 million won't get you Alec Baldwin's house in the Hamptons on Long Island, but it will get you into his neighborhood if you want Alec Baldwin for a neighbor. Now, how did we pick the agents? We didn't. The brokerages picked which agents would be tested, though the brokers didn't know it. Whoever was on the board to handle walk-ins, whoever was taking phone calls, internet contacts to the office, that was our agent. We did 86 of these tests, 86 pairs at 12 companies, 12 brands that together represent more than half of the sellers in our market. Familiar names: Keller Williams, Coldwell Banker, Century 21, Remax, as well as regional brands. We didn't feel comfortable being the referee, so we had two fair housing experts review each test for equal treatment. One runs a fair housing program and has done tests for the US Department of Justice, and the other is the law professor who wrote the legal textbook on fair housing law. only if both of our referees independently threw a flag did we call a penalty on an agent. But we didn't publish yet. Before we published, our team gave the agents and their brokers details so they could watch the videos and respond to our findings. And we put the videos and their responses online so there was no out of context. In other words, this was not a drive-by investigation. This was a careful effort that took a team more than 3 years. Now, the results. Asian buyers were treated differently than their white counterparts 19% of the time. So 2 out of 10 on average. Hispanic buyers were treated differently than whites 39% of the time, 4 out of 10. And Black buyers were treated differently than whites 49% of the time, 5 out of 10. Most of the attention has been, of course, on that high difference for Black customers. That makes sense in light of history and current events. But I'd say don't lose sight of the rest. If 4 out of 10 Hispanic buyers, if 2 out of 10 Asian buyers were treated poorly, and we're half a century after the civil rights laws were passed, those seem like high numbers as well. We viewed this as testing the gatekeepers in real estate to see how they perform. Out of 12 companies, only 2, and these were 2 small regional brands, were the only ones to pass all of their tests. So it's fair to say that most of these national and regional real estate companies were contributing to the racial segregation in our suburbs. Now, you no doubt have already asked yourself the most important questions. Would the results be different if we repeated the test in your community? If this weekend, white and Black and Latino and Asian homebuyers go shopping for homes in your area, or Christians and Muslims and Jews, or straight couples and gay couples and singles, if they are searching for homes with the same criteria, on Monday morning in their email, will they be receiving the same listings? That's the test. Let's dig into what sort of differences we saw. We saw first just different levels of service, quantity of service. Overall, our white testers got 50%, 50% more listings than their Black counterparts. We also saw differences in how buyers were screened. Some agents refused to help our Black or Hispanic buyer unless they signed an exclusive contract. They said that was the policy of the brokerage. But the same agent didn't require a contract from the white buyer. And we saw steering. In general, agents directed 24%, 1 out of 4, of our minority home buyers into different communities, different school districts altogether. No overlap with the areas that whites were given. And there were inappropriate comments by agents, making comments about the race or ethnicity or religion of people who live in an area, or comments about the schools, comments about crime, comments about resale values as a way of encouraging or usually discouraging someone from living in those areas. That's steering, especially when the agent gave contrary information or leaves out that advice for the other buyer. We heard agents tell white buyers to avoid an area because of poor resale values, while encouraging minority buyers to look in the same area. You know, it was fascinating. Minority buyers were not subjected to racial comments or inappropriate remarks. We're past the days of signs that say whites only. It was the white buyers who heard the inappropriate comments about race and their proxies, schools, crime, resale values. Now, here's a video clip which highlights this problem of inappropriate comments. Just take me a second to start that for you. Here we go.
They came in,
Okay.
and they really took over Springs in Northwest Woods area.
Here, an agent gives conflicting advice about Freeport.
I like Freeport. Now you have a bad school district, and that's not good for resale value.
All the school bus, see the moms that are hanging out on the corners.
But you don't want to go there. It's a mixed neighborhood. It's been the United Nations.
Because you might be more comfortable in a certain demographic area that isn't heavily one way or another in terms of the people.
Bayshore has two school districts, Brentwood and Bayshore. You don't want to have Brentwood school districts. You want to have Bayshore school district.
I can't say anything, but I encourage you. I want you to go there at 10 o'clock at night with your wife to buy diapers. Go to that 7-Eleven. They didn't buy there.
No, that's great.
I have to say it without saying it. You know, you have the knowledge of the areas.
Yes.
You know. I don't want to use the word steer, but I try to use another word. I educate in the
absolutely.
areas.
That's...
You know.
Yeah. How are you, Russ? Hey, Russ. Good. How are you?
We're either waiting for the owner or waiting for the agent to show up.
You don't want to be. I don't think you should be in Elmont. I think you should probably just be Franklin Square.
And I remember specifically, he talked about steering.
Yes, that's what he said. Steering, yeah.
Yeah. And in the same breath, he mentioned, well, steering's bad, but this is what I'm going to do.
There's something called steering. No steering, you know, like steering.
Oh, like a car or something?
No, like a horse, you know.
You know, it seemed that some agents have gotten a message through their training or office culture that complying with the fair housing laws is some sort of political correctness, that it means not saying the wrong thing or not saying the wrong thing to the wrong person who might complain about it. Perhaps we need more attention to steering and differential treatment, more attention to what people do and not just what they say. And are agents giving the same advice to all clients? Are they treating all clients equally?
Yeah, you say reference to steering a lot. I mean, how did that show up in your tests?
Andy, you know, steering is sort of a catch-all term, and it's sometimes used a little, you know, broadly. And let's talk about the behaviors that we saw. Telling one person that there is no housing in an area in their price range. You won't find anything there for your money, but showing housing in that price range in that area to others, that's a form of steering. We've been discussing this in terms of individual buyers, but let's look at the steering for a moment, neighborhood by neighborhood, from the neighborhood perspective. Both of our testers would ask for an area, let's say within half an hour of Northport, or a 40-minute commute to the city. And that creates a circle. And that circle would include many communities and school districts and neighborhoods. But sometimes in the wider residential parts of that circle, the listings would be given only to our white buyers. So we understand minorities are being steered around those communities. That's what we were testing for. We also saw something else we hadn't expected. We had minority communities where no one of any race got the listings. These minority areas are within the circle for both testers. There are homes for sale in the price range that they've given. But the agents didn't send those listings to either buyer. These were the communities with more than a modest amount of Black population. The agents routinely ignored those areas for all buyers. That's steering too. You know, in that case, not only are the white and minority home buyers being steered illegally, both buyers are being harmed by that steering, but also the communities are being harmed, the governments, and anyone who has tried to sell a home in those areas and their listing brokers could have a lawsuit under the Fair Housing Act against the brokerages that are steering around their communities. And you understand why fewer buyers means lower home values, lower home equity, less money to send the grandkids to college, and less tax money for schools and parks and libraries. Now, here's a video clip with a classic, straightforward example of steering, directing buyers to areas that match the buyer's race. An agent tells one family, a man shopping for himself, his wife, and their teenager, that a community would be a good place to live with the nicest neighbors. While the same agent warns another family, a man shopping for himself, his wife, and their teenager, warns them that the same community is a dangerous place. Here we go. I'm going to play this clip for you. Here we go. Just takes a second.
Kelvin Toon is a black man in his early 50s, and he went in to meet with an agent involving a test in the Brentwood community, a community that is 80% Hispanic and black. The agent communicated to Kelvin, our black tester, that she enjoyed meeting with clients from the Brentwood area.
Every time I get a new listing in Brentwood or a new client, I get so excited because they're the nicest people.
When we sent Kelvin's counterpart in to meet with the same agent, the white tester was actually warned about Brentwood not being a nice place.
The nursing home we need to be near is in Brentwood.
Okay.
And so we found a couple that are in Brentwood.
Pretty close to each other.
Okay. And it just seemed like those would be handy also for going to visit.
Do you want to give me them and I'll look into them for you? Or?
Yeah, I can do that.
That warning came later to the white testers saying there was concern about gang activity going on in Brentwood. This agent wanted the white tester to know, but that information wasn't provided to Kelvin, the black tester. The listings centered black tester Kelvin in Brentwood with 27 house listings, while the white tester got 0 listings in Brentwood and was directed towards much whiter neighborhoods.
Bill, do you think the agents included in this documentary were knowingly steering? I mean, some of them come right out and say it, but others, do you think it could be some form of unconscious bias?
You know, Andy, some agents did whisper, I shouldn't be saying this, but I guess that's the real estate equivalent of hold my beer. Something bad is about to happen. Unconscious bias is an interesting topic, that bias that we all may have without thinking about it. But the first point to keep in mind is that it doesn't matter if the bias is intentional or not. The Fair Housing Act and your state laws cover behavior, not thoughts or motives. The law is not a mind reader. It's the effect of your action, not your intent, that matters. And this isn't so surprising. Does the IRS ask if you intended to not report your income? If a real estate agent is treating one person better than another similarly situated person, and the difference between them is one of the 7 categories in the Fair Housing Act, the agent and the broker have violated the law. To remind you, those categories are color, race, religion, national origin, disability, sex, and family status, usually meaning having children or being pregnant. Now, although practically intent doesn't matter, it is interesting to speculate about the motivations of the agents. If you want to stop something from happening, you have to consider why it's happened. It appears that some agents may be profiling or assuming that the person of color can't really afford the homes in the price range they've given, or can't qualify for the mortgage, and will be wasting the agent's time while accepting the same price range without question from a white buyer. Let's talk about profiling for a minute. One of the tricky things about profiling is that it's so ineffective. We usually talk about profiling as though it's a shortcut to success. We have shows about FBI crime profilers. Maybe it's somewhat politically incorrect, but it's effective. But experts in law enforcement and many other fields say the real problem with profiling is that it doesn't work. Let's look at a different context. Let's say you want to stop school shootings from happening. Who plays video games that are violent, or who dresses a certain way? Any parent can tell you these are not good predictors of who will be a school shooter. The profile fits too many good kids and may miss the kid who is planning an attack. What are better predictors? Conduct, stockpiling weapons, telling other students of plans. Or think about airport safety. Religion is not a good way to identify who's a terrorist. Police say they would waste investigative resources on innocent people because of what type of person they are, and would miss people who are planning an attack based on what conduct they are doing. And in real estate terms, you're in a commission business. You leave money on the table if you assume that people of color can't be good customers. Besides, not to mention, steering is illegal. So why do it? Some agents may think, consciously or not, that they'll make money faster with less effort if they steer people to homes where you'll feel comfortable. But why assume that people want segregated neighborhoods? Why even assume that the person standing in your office isn't actually married to someone of a different race or religion or background? Besides, did I mention steering is illegal? Maybe agents fear that sellers or their neighbors who are potential customers would be angry if they brought minority buyers into a wider area. Or agents could fear that appraisers or lenders would be biased. That would make it hard to close a sale. And there is evidence going back for decades and right up to this summer of bias in appraisal and in lending. These subjects are getting a lot of attention from the White House, from HUD, and from industry groups. Meanwhile, the legal burden is on you to treat every customer fairly. You know, a final possible explanation for steering, I guess we're down to a few agents may be prejudiced. And I assume that that is a very small group, irrelevant to our discussion. There's just too much steering going on for it to be accounted for by only bad people doing it. Good people have to be doing it too.
Well, let's back up just a little bit. You know, during a couple of the videos, and as you talked before, there was a lot of discussion about schools and how they play into those actions of the agents. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Over and over, we heard agents explain to our buyers everything is decided by schools. Agents would tout one district over another. Some were blue ribbon and others were declining. Some were in demand and some you want to avoid. But often the agents gave different information to different buyers. Let's step back and get a little context about schools. America's school districts are so segregated by race in many communities that directing someone to a certain school is the same as directing them to an area with a higher or lower minority population, even if race isn't mentioned. It is a shock, but America's schools are more segregated now than they were 30 years ago. And of course, school segregation and housing segregation are intertwined because we have school districts. You may have heard agents say, oh, I can't talk about schools. But the Fair Housing Act doesn't say that. Our legal advisors were clear on this. Agents can answer factual questions about schools. Agents can refer customers to websites with information. The problem arises when agents are picking and choosing districts that are different for different customers, or making comments about schools. Maybe they're comments about school test scores, comments about demographics that steer some customers away or all customers away from certain schools. Here's a discussion of schools from our video, and you'll hear from our law professor, an advisor on our project. Let me start that video. Okay, here we go.
I said, do you really want your future children going to Amityville School District?
We're going to try and stay away from Freeport, Roosevelt, Hempstead for now because of the school district.
This part, the Salisbury part, is in demand because the schools are much, much, much better.
In Newsday's 86-pair tests, agents often applied a laser-like focus on school districts, highlighting their perceived quality when recommending places that house hunters should consider buying or avoid. Fair housing experts say touting or disparaging school districts can put agents in jeopardy because talking about school districts can be taken as a euphemism for race.
There's a few districts that I know I would I won't look in those towns.
Oh, okay.
You know, like Freeport and Baldwin and Amityville, which is part of Massapequa schools, but it's just certain parts of Massapequa.
If the customer asked about the quality of the schools and the agent responded with accurate information, I think the agent would be fine. The problem with talking about differentials in schools is that at least in the last 10 or 15 years, that has been a proxy for race. They don't mention the race of the community. Good schools are available in these areas. Those areas I'd stay away from because they have poor schools. I want to ask, did you tell that to the other tester? If you're only giving that information to one tester of the two, and the only difference is the race, then you've provided what I call differential service.
If you're in Massapequa, you only want school district 23.
Okay.
You don't want 6 in Massapequa because that takes in Amityville, and you're not going to like those schools.
The agent who was writing there very helpfully made lists for the buyers of which schools to consider, and then sent the testers, of course, back to the newspaper office with different lists. Schools are the hardest part of this, so let's dig into this just a little deeper. How do you discuss school quality? Because I know customers ask you, which are the good schools, without violating the fair housing laws and without doing harm in your communities. If you do feel pressure to talk about schools, the clear advice from our experts is to limit your information to answering factual questions. Maybe the parents are interested in football or the band program and you know something about that. Or you can refer them to factual information on school district, school department, state education department websites. But the advice is to stay away from the trap of using or responding to labels such as good schools or nice schools. Here's one of the complicated parts. Realtors are not experts in schools. What do we mean by that? If you're judging what schools are best, you're probably using school test scores, right? Write this on the blackboard 100 times. School test scores don't tell you how good a school is. School test scores tell you, as any educator knows, mostly how wealthy and educated are the parents who send their kids to that school. Why? In America, wealth and education of parents is a very good predictor of their children's test scores. And race in America is a very good predictor of the family's wealth and education. So you see the problem. A so-called high-performing school may just be an area with wealthier, better educated parents. Steering parents around schools with lower test scores is just perpetuating segregation by income and race. Now, this pitfall has been recognized, for example, by greatschools.org, the school ranking service that's used by Realtor.com and so many agents. It changed its ratings a year ago, focusing more on student improvement. Now, That's good, but even today, the main ingredients in its ratings tell you more about the parents than they tell you about the schools. Now, you want a bottom line. Can you talk about school test scores and refer parents to websites that list them? Legally, yes, you can. Our experts are clear on that. You can even share those flawed ratings from the rating agencies. I'm injecting a bit of caution into your thinking on test scores because I want you to wrestle with a harder question. I guess it's a moral question. Is it right to steer buyers based on school test scores in a country as segregated as ours, when test scores so closely follow wealth and therefore race? It might be more public-spirited, and it also keeps you within the law to explain to parents that they need to do their homework. It's okay to say to customers, there are fair housing laws that limit what advice I can give on schools. And we have those laws, by the way, for a very good reason, because there's a long, ugly legacy of segregation. Did you know that school test scores mostly tell you how educated the parents are, not which schools are good? And it's okay to say to the customers, if schools are important to you, you need to do your homework. Talk with the principal. Talk with other parents. Visit the school if you can. You know, if they were buying a boat, they'd go look at boats.
So very true. I mean, we've talked a lot so far then about your investigation, but let's talk a little bit about the aftermath. What was the reaction from the real estate industry, participants, the government, those kind of things?
Well, often I'm asked what happened to the agents in the videos. We know that disciplinary hearings for the agents are continuing in New York, and we'll see if anyone loses a license. One agent gave up her license instead of facing the charges, and we know of 2 agents recently who won their cases. The agent who warned the white buyer about gang activity, but didn't warn the black buyer, just recently she got to keep her license. The judge criticized the state for not doing any investigating, not interviewing our testers, not even gathering the listings that they were getting. So we'll see if the state does more homework in other cases. The agents and the brokers were called to testify before a state committee hearing, state senate in New York, that was considering changes in state law. The agent who said, follow the school bus, see what mothers are waiting to meet the bus, she said she just meant for the customers to learn where the bus routes were. And the agent who said the Hispanics are taking over the neighborhood, he said he meant that in a positive way. The most surprising part of the hearing was that the brokers all said they had reviewed the tests and found nothing wrong. Their position seemed to be that if steering wasn't announced, if the agents didn't say out loud, I'm now going to steer based on race and ethnicity, then it wasn't illegal. And you know better. And the senators know better. New York's legislature has approved changes in state laws, including testing to be done by the state attorney general's office. Who's paying for that testing? The real estate industry, through small surcharges on each license renewal. We'll see if the new governor in New York signs those laws, but they were supported by the state Realtor Association. Now, nationally, NAR has responded vigorously to Newsday's investigation, and you're going to hear from Alexia Smokler from NAR to discuss those changes with you. I'd like to add a couple of thoughts just as a layman about fixes. You know, our team often would discuss when the testers would come back and we'd watch the videos, how hard would it be to stop steering? It did seem clear that many of the realtors in our tests were unfamiliar with minority neighborhoods. Now, looking way back in my career after my banking stories in Atlanta, one bank put its lenders on a bus to tour the wonderful new homes in a black subdivision, a subdivision they had never heard of. Magnificent kitchens. It blew apart their stereotypes. Maybe a bus tour in your community wouldn't be a bad idea. We also noticed that our large real estate brands on Long Island had more than 200 branch offices in our area, but not a single office was in those communities where most of the minority residents live. And those brokers didn't represent many sellers in the minority areas either. What we saw in our test makes me wonder whether brokers make an effort to know whether steering is happening in their offices. Brokers, do you check to see what listings your agents give to customers? Which neighborhoods, which schools, and what other areas might have matched up with the customer's actual criteria? You know, if you think about it, when the agent is clicking on that screen in the MLS or their company software to generate listings, that's the moment when steering is happening. That means the records are in the computer. That means those records will end up in court. The records wouldn't prove illegal discrimination, but they sure would be a red flag. I wonder if your MLS warns brokers which communities and which schools your agents are choosing and which ones they're skipping over. If your MLS isn't giving you that information, shouldn't you be demanding it from a risk management perspective? Remember, differences in treatment are just as likely to be unintentional, not based on some outright bias. They might just be based on a loose process that allows people to act on stereotypes or ignorance. That's what people mean by systemic discrimination. They mean it's not an individual bad actor. It's not saying everyone's doing it on purpose. It's saying nobody may be doing it on purpose. But there might be a system of policies and practices that can lead to different treatment. You know, the most important changes might be to examine how do things work in our office. For example, it's legal to require pre-approval from everyone, and it's legal to require pre-approval from no one. It's in between where the broker's license is at risk. Let me give a law professor, Bob Schwinn from Kentucky, a last word on this subject in a video that takes just a minute. Here we go.
I'm a law professor at the University of Kentucky, and I've been a law professor for a long number of years. All we're asking in these tests, you get two people who come in and ask for exactly the same thing. Why don't you give them the same listings? Why don't you pre-qualify them in exactly the same way? It's not that big a burden. This is a law. This should be treated like a tax law or any other law. You have to obey this law, and particularly if you're in a licensed business like real estate agents, if you can't obey the law, you ought to just get out.
Now, the professor really steps up to the plate there. I think the hard part, though, is that you all want to obey the law. Everybody does. The complication might be to think, how might some differences in treatment creep into our process? How do things work in our office? As a starting point, I am with the professor. Why not give them all the listings? The easiest way to stop illegal steering might be to stop picking neighborhoods for communities. Stop steering customers at all. My hope is that you will share our documentary film with all your customers and your fellow agents and brokers. But don't stop there. I hope you'll have a conversation. The film, the stories are at newsday.com/divided, and we'll share this in the chat. But have a movie night, but not aimed at deciding who's the bigot in our office. That's not productive. But how does it work in our office? How do we pre-qualify people? What checklists do we have? How do we make sure everybody gets the same listings that are available when they're available? Those are the tests, the how does it work engineering kind of questions. I hope I've given you something to discuss and something to think about. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bill. I mean, this has been incredibly eye-opening for folks in our industry. And I know the vast majority of our realtor members out there want to be good, right? We want to do what's right. We want to do best for our communities as a whole. And the question of the unconscious bias is the part that kind of is the tough part, right? It seems to me that a lot of things are set by setting up a system, can be eliminated by having a system, having a process in place and sticking with it and not deviating from that. Could you share just a little bit on that here at the end?
I do get the impression that some agents may need to be emboldened to say, you know, I can tell you there's a law, there are fair housing laws, and we have them for a good reason. Segregation's evil. And so it's a good thing that we have these laws, and we're used to that in other areas. If our builder says I can't do that in a building code, we understand. I couldn't put this part on your car; it's not street legal. Most of us would get that, and I think it's okay to be clear, not just to have the sign on the wall, but to be able to convey to people. You know, I think it's actually a good thing that we have these restrictions. Because this is such an important decision for buyers and for customers. I think the training, and Alexi is going to describe for you Fairhaven and the sort of video game training that NAR has done, and it's so well done. And I think that there's a lot of value. They've really seen that there's a lot of value in role playing. And in your office, if you were handing the microphone around and taking turns answering that question, which are the good schools? Now, what's the right answer to that? What's the right answer for our office legally? What's the right answer for that for our community? I think that kind of role playing and training is maybe an effective part that we've left out of past training. Just sort of sitting through a class, that's the movie part of driver's ed. It's not the driving part of driver's ed. And I think NAR is really trying to get at that through Fairhaven especially.